I guess it's important for me to highlight here that that experience deeply damaged me emotionally, and for you, as far as I'm aware, it didn't.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think in overt manner it has had an impact. It's interesting when you're talking about the communication part. Like, and I'm reflecting now. I'm like, definitely there was, my parents did a really good job of trying to communicate, but I think there was definitely there were ideas around. I know for my mum took it really hard. She was Catholic, and for her, the fact that her marriage broke down her whole relationship with God. And I recall, up until I was 11, we used to go to church religiously. Sorry, pun sort of intended slash not intended. But we used to go to church every Sunday. And I remember around 11, the age of 11, which was when the divorce happened, that we didn't have to go to church anymore. She wasn't really going anymore. It might be for Christmas or Easter, but she was sort of like, okay, God, why did you let this happen to me? You know, I thought we were meant to, have a marriage in which we stay together. So she took that to heart. And also, just whenever we went to like spend time with my dad, when he had a girlfriend, she'd be asking questions about how our weekend was. But I recall feeling like, oh, I feel like this is dangerous territory to talk about. And I could see that she'd get upset when we couldn't share. So, in terms of communication, I think, yes, with the sit down conversation, that was great. But I feel like there were times where we did find it difficult to communicate to our parents. They'd say the things of, please share with us and we can get you a counselor. But there were, as a child, you still sometimes will just pick up on things that you can't necessarily pinpoint, but you feel like, I don't feel like I can actually say everything right now. So yes, it wasn't traumatic in the sense of, there was a complete lack of communication, but didn't always feel safe. But I feel like for the most part, that definitely wasn't as difficult a breakdown for us as it would have been for other children in their experiences. But I know for my sister, because she was 16 at the time, 15, 16 when it first happened, she was doing her GCSEs, which in the UK is when you're 16 and you're doing sort of those final exams before you get that choice to continue studying. And for her, it had a massive impact. Completely uprooting, going to mums and dads, back and forth on the weekends. Maybe it was because I was younger, but
Okay, so your sister's older.
yes, my sister's older. Yes.
So it would have happened to me around that age. And if I, to be frankly honest, I would have thought, and this isn't to be egotistical or anything, but this is
No.
just to give a reflection of what I was like as a child prior to this happening. I would have been one of the top students in primary school class, and I messed around a lot even prior to the divorce. I was always, I was always a class clown. I always enjoyed a cheap laugh out of people, and I was always the one, causing disturbances. But I don't know why. Maybe it's because I wasn't stimulated enough, or maybe I just wanted the attention. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's just because I'm actually funny and people, I don't know, actually find it humorous. I'm not sure. But whenever it happened, um, as I said, it was leading up, I don't know, for maybe 3-4 years until it actually happened. There was just a lot of like unhappiness in the home. And as you say, as a child, you kind of intuitively, although you wouldn't understand as a child, you're being intuitive, but you almost intuitively know that you're not allowed to ask a question about this, or you're not allowed to talk about this. And as a child, and consider a child however you want, as a 1 year old to a 15-year old, a child's a child. That's a lot of pressure to put on a kid, and I know for me anyway, it also affected me. You can see there's something going wrong, but you're scared to ask the question because of how your parents might react to you, and then that'll be your fault.
Yes,
And that's,
definitely.
again, it's not to blame my parents or anyone's parents. If your parents haven't been given the tools, or if anyone hasn't been taught or educated or given the tools to kind of have those conversations or to take themselves out of it to put someone else first. I guess it's hard, but yeah, it had a pretty big impact on me. I dropped most of my grades. I started to become really, I don't know,
Disengaged.
even more disturbing at school, like just acting out even more so. Um, Obviously, my performance in school took a big dip as well, and
Mm.
that obviously had an impact on my parents. So that was, why are you not performing anymore? I guess.
It's interesting when you were talking about children intuitively knowing about if something's going on, and that sort of that secret idea, because that's actually just made me think of something that I was reading about the other day about how we process and how we communicate as adults. And it's I think the piece, it was sort of a psychological piece but combined with a spiritual, and with regards to archetypes. So we have these particular, each individual will have certain, sometimes we might act as a child, or we I laugh because I was doing that yesterday. um we might have our inner child, or we have like our inner artist, or all these different types of roles that we play. And you know when we what the way that we're brought up, and there's a culture of, you can't share that outside of the family,
Yes.
you can't talk about that. That's or even the expression, which is probably really big in probably both UK and Ireland, would be, you don't wash, or you don't, your dirty laundry,
Ah, yeah, you don't wash your dirty laundry, or
in
dirty
public.
washing in
Yeah,
public.
yeah. And it would be, you've got those and it's very like, oh no, you don't do that, you don't share things outside the family. um
I guess that sort of comes obviously because they're both like religious countries, Ireland especially. I suppose it's that, like, almost, particularly surrounding a divorce, it's that like shame and the guilt, like
mm,
societally and culturally imposed. When you break that down,
it's
I suppose you're
breaking
sort of
what God.
shunned. Yes, it's breaking God, and then the community, and oh, people will
mm,
judge you. You weren't able to keep a marriage going, so therefore you're not a good Christian. Ergo, you're not a good person.
but you're not a good Christian in other people's eyes, rather than
Keeping up
how.
appearances.
Exactly. It's interesting that you use the word shame as well. I remember going to this workshop in Burning Seed, and they said that shame, because you've got at the beginning, it's like should, it's that should behavior, and shame is related to like what others perceive you as, whereas
Mhm.
guilt is like, I acknowledge I've done something wrong. Um, I would just like to play with those differences, the shame and the guilt, and that is, there's a lot of shame around divorce, um, and it does filter down to the children, unfortunately, with that keeping secrets, and then the family that you're meant to be able to actually, you're living day in day out with, you're not able to actually
Have
ask
that
them the question.
conversation. Yeah,
And I think that later has impacts on relationships later on in life, because that's your first template. I know that's
100%.
definitely what we've been unpacking.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's again why I wanted to have this conversation, because throughout our time being together in the capacity that we are in, I have been able to unpack all of that
Mm,
behavior and all of that trauma and all of those thinking and behavior patterns that, I absorbed like a sponge
mm,
whenever all of this was happening.
mm,
And it's only really now that, I am able to talk about this, and it's not coming from a place of anger. Like, there was a lot of anger
mm,
towards my mother and my father for a very long time. I still had a relationship with them both, but I was angry because I never knew what happened, and nobody would tell me the truth. And it goes back to that intuitive thing as a child.
mm.
It's like, I know there's something not right here, but they're not giving me an answer
Yeah,
because I'm a child,
yeah,
you know?
because
And
I
I
can't
guess,
understand it.
yes,
And
but then they're making that assumption. Well, who are you to say that anyone can't understand the truth of what a situation may be?
well, and it's also about making it appropriate. You can still have that discussion, but just actually level it down. Um, in the Celestine Prophecy, it's, I think it's, which is this book which talks about this manuscript, and there's different insights. I just finished it the other day. Um,
Big bookworm, Charlie. 2 books a
I
week.
try. That one was taking me a few weeks. Um, but it's actually, one of the insights is about how we communicate with children. And it's, instead of talking down to them as children, there was, it's it's a story, but it does have like spiritual insights, and it talks about, we talk with children as adults or just as an individual, and there's this particular child, and she's just very eloquently spoken, and they were just like, well, how do you explain, in the story they're like, how do you explain this to the child? And she's like, well, you explain it, but you just break it down so the child can understand. You just think about that. Imagine if you were able to do that with everything. And definitely in my work I do try and do that. And I think that's been, I've seen that definitely in the last year and a half with how I communicate with the children. Obviously, I have my moments where I'm not necessarily working in my, prefrontal cortex or my executive state where I'm reasoning well, and as we all do, we all have bad days, but most of the time I try and come from that conscious place as I'm talking to the children, and I definitely see a difference in how they communicate back. And I definitely feel like they feel safe enough to discuss certain things. Obviously, I can't go in detail here about what conversations they have, but definitely about things that are happening at home. Um, because as we're seeing more now and now, that is that breakdown more often. Because I suppose, especially in Australia and compared to when we were children, it's not as shameful as it used to
as it
be,
was.
as it was the breakdown of marriages.
Yeah, well, you have to consider this happened for me 14 years ago, 15 years ago now, and you more about 17, 18 years ago.
Yeah,
So it's 2 decades